Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 8 of Heaven Official's Blessing. Now, 8 is my lucky number, and I always have a series that are like 11 to 13 episodes. I have the rule of 8, which means that the 8th episode is usually really, really good. Now, the question is, are we treating this as the 8th episode or next week as the 8th episode? Because technically, Netflix is calling this episode 8, but we know that episodes 1 and 2 are actually together. So next week could be episode 8 as well. So the rule of 8 could apply to this week's episode or next week. After we watch next week's, I think the jury will be out until that moment. But 8's my lucky number. I'm always excited for the 8th episode of any series that I watch. So I'm really excited for this series for this week as well as next week too. So yeah, it's been a solid week since I've watched an episode. I was gone on vacation for a little bit, and then I was catching up with other things, and so it's been a solid week since over a solid week since I've watched episode 7. So I had to go back and rewatch it today, look at everybody's comments for episodes 6 and 7. Good times. I'm really excited to see where this story is going to be going, and we're just getting into the lore and like delving into it and starting to like break it apart maybe. And so I feel like this story is a long story. It has got a lot of content, so there's going to be lots of things to break down as we go, and I'm pretty excited about that. But I do have some comments before we get started, so this intro may be a little bit longer than usual. Harry, who has a different name on YouTube, but Harry was talking about how Billy, there's a translation error with Billy. Their subtitles said that it just rains around Hua Chong. He had the bloody umbrella in episode 6, and there was rain everywhere, and it was blood. It wasn't the blood from the ghosts. Bloody rain just follows Hua Chong everywhere. Why not? Just his style, right? Keong Fong talked about how San Long is not doing too much to hide all this ghostly knowledge that he has, which does make him suspicious as being Hua Chong. But to be fair, Xie Lian is not hiding much either. Like, he admits several times, rewatching episode 6 and episode 7, Xie Lian multiple times reveals information that would make San Long think that he's the actual god. So Xie Lian's taking a page out of Wuxian's playbook and just not doing a good job at hiding the fact of who he actually is, which is kind of funny, right? Not only that, but Ivan and Ida point out that now Fong expected Xie Lian to have better living conditions. I likened that to be the fact that Xie Lian was once a prince and is a god, so they should have better living conditions, but there may be more to that we'll find out as we go. SQQ LBH 1314 said that the gold leaves in the heavenly realm are akin to a tradition in China called grabbing the red envelope, which is what a lot of group chats, a gesture in group chats of giving out money, and you kind of just click the envelope and maybe you get 1 merit, maybe you get 100 merits. You just find out when you click it. So that's why some of the gods got like multiple gold leaves and some only got 1. So I like this tied to that like actual cultural thing. That's pretty cool. I liked that a lot. Jaden said that long is also known as a term of endearment, and so back in like episode 3, when we got the whole thing with Shanji, she called him Pei Long at one point, so I was like, oh, it's a term of endearment. So not only is it a play on the third son, that's the whole thing with MXTX and this being the third story, but it's also a play on the fact that it's a term of endearment. Gee, can't imagine why San Long would have that kind of name. I just love that Xie Lian this whole time is clueless. Xie Lian is just clueless as to what's going on. They don't understand. Four Sunsets talked about the idea of yin and yang, and that yin is tied to more like cold, femininity and the moon, and that yang is tied more to the sun and masculinity and to people. And so that was kind of interesting because SQQ kind of had the same thing going on, talking about like how San Long out in the sunlight kind of powers down. And they were like, well, if he was Ha Chong, and I'm like, don't spoil me, I don't want any spoilers, but that was Four Senses saying it's kind of like Pokemon, where it's like, it's super effective against ghosts if you're in, sunlight. And I don't want any world building spoilers. If it's going to be brought up in the novel, if it's going to be brought up in the manhwa, I want a reason to read the novel. If I get spoiled with it now, why do I even need to read the novel, right? So don't spoil me if it's going to come out in the novel. But if it's something that's like a Chinese mythology thing like that, then that's okay. We can talk about that. But I thought that was pretty funny because I see San Long and possibly Hua Chong as the sime top in this relationship. So the fact that if they're associated with the ghost realm that's tied to femininity, that's interesting. But again, we've got lots of content in the novel to get through, so that should be fine. But also, Four Sunsets also talked about like official gods versus unofficial gods, and then in a lot of Chinese mythology, your official gods are ones that are appointed and have like a job to do, and they're considered more reliable because it's kind of like they're accredited. They're like accredited gods. They've gone through the screening process, and so mortals consider them more trustworthy because they've been certified, heavenly realm certified and approved as being trustworthy and able to solve their problems. Whereas unofficial gods can still get the same power through the same means, but they're not certified. They don't have the seal of approval, so they're not quite as trustworthy and they're a little bit more unstable. So that led me to believe that maybe the priest from the Half Moon Kingdom kind of became one of these unofficial gods and got all of this power through the big blood altar that happens in the last episode. And so the power's not regulated, so they were still very powerful, but Four Sunsets also notes that the power is not trustworthy. It can be taken on through evil offerings like the blood altar, and that many don't fulfill the followers' wishes and are actually altered by and influenced by the wishes of those that worship them. So they likened it, Four Sunsets made the comparison to the dancing goddess in Modazushi that we see like early on, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. It's kind of one of those same deals, that this priest, this interceptor is kind of the same deal. And I was like, that would make a lot of sense. So that's kind of scary because it's like your power is kind of dictated by whatever the worshipers put their faith in with you. That's kind of terrifying because then what if you can't live up to it? So that's an interesting concept to think about as we move forward any further. And that kind of ties to a couple other people were noting how like what defines a god and what defines a ghost. So I have a feeling this story is going to talk about that. So I'm pretty excited to get into it. And then finally, Goldman had some really cool stuff in their comments. They talked about how the Imperial Preceptor is basically like a pope, like a religious leader, but in this case, they've turned into like a wrath. So it's kind of cool. You have like this religious figure that's gone down the wayward, darkened path and has turned into a ghost. So that's fun. And then the Half Moon Kingdom, and some other people noted this as well, the Half Moon Kingdom is likely kin to semi-nomadic kingdoms along the Silk Road that in the past would have been kind of at war and sparring with the Central Plains, which is akin to more like the central tribes and clans of China, that kind of the more civilized dynasties, things like that. So it's kind of taking a little bit of historical and cultural artifacts and making them into a more fantasy-like setting, which is pretty cool. I like that, taking something historical and making it more fantasy. That's pretty cool. And then thank you, Goldman, for doing the function and function, the difference, that they're kind of homophones. They sort of sound the same, but they are different people. That the priest for the Half Moon Pass is function, which means fragrant heart, and then you have function that means wind message, and then that's the god that I believe Non Fong works for. So that's good times. Good times. Let me pull up my character chart here to know about the deputy gods. So yeah, Non Fong works for function. There we go. And Fu Yao works for Sean Jin. So there we go. So yeah, I got done less than 10 minutes. Woo! So it is scorching hot outside. I've got my light on and I'm sweating. It is scorching hot. So I poured myself some juice and was like, let's do this. I wanted to support Red because I love San Long and I have a feeling we're gonna get along real good. But yeah, our sweet cinnamon bun, Xie Lian, he tried to like have his bandage grab a hold of something sturdy, and it did, but it's not what he expected, so. But I'm really excited to see what's gonna happen in this episode. I hope y'all are too, but let's not waste any more time and dive in and see just what happens this episode. If they're going to rescue our poor boy from the sand whirlwind that he's been scooped up into. Let's find out. We're going to start Heaven Official's Blessing, episode 8, technically episode 7, and we're going to start that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. So remember how I thought that San Long wasn't Hua Chong for a while? There's no way he's not. No, that sealed the deal. That him blowing that snake up sealed the deal. He is Hua Chong. There's no way he's not. There's no way he's human. He is a devastation rank ghost, and that snake just bit the wrong person. Oh my god. So yeah, I mean, don't confirm if I'm right or not. Let me wait it out until we find out, maybe by the end of this season, if he is in fact. I want it at this point. At this point, I am 95% sure that San Long is Hua Chong. 95% sure. But I don't want people in the comments being like, you got it. No. Let's write it out. There's a 5% chance that he's not. And then when it comes out in the show, we can all go, yeah, and scream and be excited. So yeah, just don't confirm or deconfirm my theories on this one. But he has to be Hua Chong. There's just no way. It's funny because several people, some people were asking in the comments about how they were talking about ghosts in Chinese mythology and about how sunlight affects them, right? And so they were asking, well, how is Western culture different? I'm like, well, honestly, in Western culture, ghosts it's not really sunlight that affects ghosts. That's more of like a vampire thing. So it's funny that I just got done talking about vampires in the comment section, and then we literally have San Long slurping the blood and sucking the poison out of the hand of his would-be lover. I'm like, yeah. Xie Lian didn't stop him either. He was like, oh, well, I mean, if you want to. That's the one thing. Xie Lian totally indulges in all the flirting. Xie Lian's like, well, maybe we could flirt. He doesn't say no. It's great. So, oh my gosh, this episode. So we got some exposition. I wanted to bring Whiteboard Kun out because I was like, we got a little bit of exposition and some different things thrown this way that I was like, upon review, I want to go back and rewatch it and be like, okay, wait a minute now. So I do like that we got like a little bit of continuity thing. So Xie Lian does try again. He tries again with the bandage to grab something solid, right? And it goes and gets San Long. Now at the end of the last episode, he said not San Long, and he got the bandage back and zipped away further, but here that doesn't happen. So I don't know if that's just an animation thing and they were just trying to make a cliffhanger, but that doesn't happen here. Here, San Long does get pulled up enough to where he gets and he has his hat! Oh my god, San Long has his hat! He has Xie Lian's hat. He's like, you forgot your hat! As he gets sucked up by the sandstorm, it seemed rather important. But he's like, no! And so he makes it to where San Long and him are wrapped together in the bandage. He's like, oh, Xie Lian, you're here. And he's like, don't fly away again. He's like, oh, thank you, San Long. And so he's like, oh, you know such useful magic, you priest. At this point, the cat is literally out of the bag. We were talking about in the comments, but Xie Lian is pretty awful at hiding the fact that he's ascended. He's pretty bad at it. He's about like Wushin. He's just not even trying to hide it. And San Long just takes it all in stride, but it's like, at this point that he's a god, right? And so then he wraps the bandage. He's like, oh, don't panic, San Long. I'm like, the only thing San Long is panicking about is the fact that y'all are connected at the hip, getting all wrapped up together. And then I'm sorry, but them just staring lovingly in each other's eyes. Xie Lian, do you realize what you're doing? I'm glad I chose this red drink now because it feels very appropriate given the context of this episode. What a fun coincidence. But yeah, I'm going to take a picture of that. I'm like, do you realize, Xie Lian, that you are staring lovingly into his eyes? You two have so much chemistry and you've known each other supposedly for a day. What is this business? He's like, oh, I'm sorry. It's safer this way. Yeah, sure. And he's like, it'll be over soon. San Long really doesn't seem like he's going to argue or complain. And then he says, let's try this again, but don't grab onto another person. And then what does it do? Ryuje grabs the two deputies. And he's like, why are you both here? And they're like, we'd ask you the same question. You should ask your stupid white silk. I love that he says, I told you not to grab onto people. Deputy gods are people too. I'm like, San Long is right there. San Long is right there. He knows every word you've said. It's like, come on. But he wraps them all together so that they can't get separated. And then I love this. He's like, please hang in there too. And you see Feng and Yao looks so uncomfortable, like they'd rather be anywhere else. But San Long is just like, I've had worse. Dealt with worse case scenarios. And he's like, Ryuje, don't make the same mistake again. I love that Yao's like, get it out of my face. It's great. I love this image. There's so many good shots in this episode, but this one of them together. And Song Long's just like, if you third and fourth wheels could just get out of here, that'd be great. And he's like, let's think of something else. I like that. Yeah, Feng is like, let's try a different plan. But he manages to wrap it around the pillar and manages to use it to reel him in. I love it. I love it's like just reeling him in through this tornado. It's great. And that's when he sees the entryway, and he's like, oh, good. And he's like, wow, we really are lucky. I should have realized when he's like, oh, wow, we really got lucky with this overpass that we found. Should have realized that probably Xie Lian is not lucky. Xie Lian actually has pretty bad luck. And if we're going to start with somewhere, if we're going to start anywhere, then let's establish here that our poor cinnamon bun, our poor scrap collecting god, he is pretty unlucky. He has a lot of bad luck, and he has basically all but revealed, get this right on here. He has all but revealed to Song Long that he's a god. Song Long at least knows that Feng and Yao are gods, that they are deputy gods. He at least knows that knowledge because Xie Lian said it out loud. So yeah, poor Xie Lian, he just doesn't have good luck, right? And so should have realized that I kept thinking when we got to the point about the marker, I was like, man, this seems familiar. And then I was like, is it from the ED with the snakes? And it was. It was like, okay, that's where we go to. All right. And so lighting the way, I do like that. It's weird. The lights that Feng and Yao have, they're both like flashlights, but then they can also be used as weapons. So whenever he like sent it flying against the crowd, he was using it as a flashlight, but I was like, are you going to blow these people up? Whoa. Like, it's weird because you don't know what he's going to use it for, right? Those two scoundrels would mean the priests, if I ever get them. And then I like that Yao's like, what would you do? What would you do? You're all talk, right? Swallow more sand? And I was like, shut up. These two. It's like, someone in the comments was like, Xie Lian at this point is the only one trying to solve the mystery. It's just Yao and Feng are arguing and San Long is getting drug into it. I also like that San Long is like, ew. Like, just wiping the dust off. I'm like, this is gross. I don't like this. No. But he, looking over at Xie Lian, who looks sad, he's like, Xie Lian, what's on your mind? And he's like, oh... He's like, I'm thinking about the two priests. Their gait was unique. They can't be ordinary people. The way they were running, they were Naruto running awfully weird. Can't just be normal people. So, set this up here. We got our two, the priests. Got our two priests. And Xie Lian has come to the conclusion that they are not normal. They are not ordinary. We've come to this conclusion about them. The one in white should be the Imperial Preceptor. I thought she was more like in a mint green, but white will go with it. And then the one in black. And they ask if she's the other priest, Feng Xin. And Xie Lian's like, well, no, that's impossible. Feng Xin was the Imperial Preceptor of Yong'an Kingdom. The two of them would have an age difference of 100 years. So, okay, this is interesting. So I'm like, all right, so... interesting that Xie Lian knows this. So apparently, if one is the half moon past priest, they would have 100 years difference from the other priest. Okay. But I'm like, we've established that deities and ghosts and stuff can live on for many, many years. So who's to say that they're not both ghosts? And we established in the last episode that the one priest is possibly a ghost, a wrath, and they can live for hundreds of years. So who's to say they're not both ghosts and they've just been living all this time? Who's to say that they can't be? I mean, they could be working together. I wouldn't put it past them. How do you know so much about Yong'an? And he's like, oh, to tell you the truth, I used to collect scraps there. Oh, so Xie Lian used to collect scraps in Yong'an. We don't know when he was collecting scraps, just that he used to collect scraps. And he's kind of like, it's no big deal. It's fine. It's fine. But anyway, the sandstorm rages. Anyway, they start looking around. Of course, the two that don't get along live Xie Lian and Song Long by themselves. They get left by themselves quite a lot. It's no wonder they flirt, right? But I'm not going to lie. This part was a little bit freaky when they turn around and look around. Zhao seems interestingly perceptive about a lot of things. Like he maybe senses that the people are there before they even find them. Zhao seems like he's pretty perceptive, right? And he can sense things before they happen. But yeah, this whole part about finding the person in the shadows is pretty scary. And so he says, Nam Fong, why didn't you use the 1,000-pound fall in the storm? And he's like, we used it. It didn't work. So I'm going to have a little thing for Feng and Yao over here. So Feng and Yao, we have Yao is pretty perceptive and kind of seemingly sense things before they happen. And then Feng has the 1,000-pound fall technique, which I'm assuming would have made them heavier maybe, and that would have allowed them to get down. And so he says that he tried to use it and it didn't work. And since this place is far to the northwest, there aren't any Shanjin temples around. My general's in charge of the southeast, his is in charge of the southwest. So we get establishment that Yao's general is over the southeast, and Feng's, which is Shanjin, is over the southwest. And we are in the northwest, so the powers are limited. So their powers basically are limited. And Xie Lian doesn't think he has any powers at all, so it's like, well, it's fine. So he says, like, beyond our turf, our spiritual powers are restricted. And then he says, that's odd. How could anyone dig a hole through such hard rock? And then Xie Lian's like, well, they could have used dynamite. And then, yeah, Yao says, like, master, like, servant. You make a fuss over everything. Like, you don't think it out and understand it. Their banter back and forth is great. But Xie Lian establishes that they could dig through the rocks and even use dynamite. So it's not unreasonable that they would carve a path out through the mountain. But then, yeah, man, we see the outline of the face, and it freaked me out a little bit. I was thinking it was going to be like a monster or something, and I was like, oh no, I would have been Feng shooting that flashlight ball. Would have done that. And so we find these merchants that are passing by with the little kid. I love the little kid taking shelter from the sandstorm. I love the whole time we're going to put San Long over here. We're going to add old San Long, aka Mr. Smirk Jr. We're going to put him up here. Is he Hua Chong? He's definitely not human, that's for sure. And he says, if you're what you claim to be, then why are you sneaking around? And I love this kid's like, well, we were fine. We were just seeking shelter here. You guys are the ones sneaking around. He's like conjuring fire out of your hands. So they don't know that they're gods. And they're like, how are you using this magic? What's the deal? How do you do it? Who knows if you're humans or ghosts? Like, how do we know? And I love that. I just love that expression on Fong's face. He's like, well, you insolent little kid. I'm a god. Don't you know? And Xie Lian's like, let's not reveal that. I love that he's like, Tian Shang, watch your mouth. So Shang and Mr. Zhang. So I'm going to put the little Tian Shang down here. Tian Shang, he is the adorable and precocious little kid. I love him. And then we have Mr. Zhang. And he is the one that is bitten by the snake, by the slithery snake. And then we have Zhao, who is the guide. And I'm sorry, but anytime in this series that we start to get like a reasonably handsome individual with some eyeliner. I'm like, are you a ghost? I feel like the meme where they're getting the butterfly and it's like character with red eyeliner, and I'm like, are you a ghost of devastation? It's just what I feel like should be applied. And then this kid, Shang, is like, you guys are the suspicious ones. And Xie Lian's like, well, I love that Xie Lian puts on his like customer service innocent smile. He's like, I know what you're thinking. He's like, it's a misunderstanding. I'm the head of a Taoist shrine, and these people are from my shrine. What they performed it's just Taoist magic. And they're like, he's powerful. In conclusion, you're just some merchants, and we're just some Taoists. When we're all seeking shelter under the same circumstances. I like that the Zheng guy's like, oh, well, since we're all common folks. And then I like that San Long is suspicious. San Long, we established, is a very suspicious and not easily trusting. Which is hilarious because it's the polar opposite of Xie Lian. Xie Lian is like a trust bomb. He's like a trust magnet. He's like, oh, I'll trust you, sure thing. And San Long is like, I'm not so easy to trust in this business. He's like, why are you still here if people disappear? How can you be common folk? I love his eyes narrowing, being like, well, you better not try to hurt my bae. And the guy's like, oh, well, the rumor is exaggerated. If you find a reliable guide and you don't go into the Half Moon Kingdom, you can pass through safely. And this kid's like, yeah, we have a local guide who helps us avoid quicksands. And he took us here as soon as the storm started. Isn't that right, Zhao? And then Xie Lian looks over to this man that is not suspicious with the not suspicious eyes and beautiful eyeliner. Totally legit. He's like, I'm just doing my job. Interesting. And so, yeah, they call Xie Lian the priest, and he's like, it's just a misunderstanding. We apologize. And so, yeah, they decide to go over and leave. And they go over to this lovely little stone tablet, and Xie Lian sits upon it. And then I like that you see San Long being like, how long is it going to be before you realize there's writing on that tablet, darling? You want to maybe move your butt and check that? Possibly? I love it. And so then he's like, there's some characters on the rock that you're sitting on. So this is the moment that you figure out it's from the ED, but they're Half Moon characters, right? And so they debate on who can actually read them. And so I was like, can you read it? And he says, actually, even before the evil priest was born, I used to collect scraps in the Half Moon Kingdom. I love that look from Yao, like, oh, look at you, Xie Lian. You're revealing that you're a god. Stop talking. So Xie Lian says that he used to collect scraps. He used to collect scraps at the Half Moon Kingdom. And Yao's like, you should probably stop talking because you're revealing that you're a god. Because they just established that people don't go there. And he's like, are there any places you haven't collected scraps? And he's like, oh. And I love that little smile. Xie Lian gives, like, I've collected scraps lots of places. Aww. It's so sweet. And so Feng's like, ignore him. What does the tablet say? And then they're talking about the life of a general. And so I love this conversation. And of course, San Long can read the Half Moon characters. And they're like, how'd you manage that? And he's like, oh, I learned some out of interest. Sure. Yeah, he can read a dead language just for funsies. Okay, sure you can, San Long. Sure you can. So and of course, the two of them in the most romantic, they have so many romantic moments in this, the two of them like crouch down to read the tablet. I love that Feng and Yao are just like, let him go. Just let him flirt, it's fine. And they're like, and I like the Shang boy stands up, like he can read too, or that he wants to read. And it's about the life of a general. I love the boy's like, is it a Half Moon Kingdom general? And I love that San Long's like, you getting near my man? Like, just like swings over. San Long, is he a jealous man? He is very cautious around Xie Lian. Which, after this whole snakebite incident, yeah, I could see why. Because Xie Lian is such a cinnamon roll. He's too trusting, right? And San Long's like, I don't trust anybody. He was from the Central Plain. And they're like, why would the Half Moon people honor a Central Plain general when they were constantly at war? And Xie Lian's like, because this general was unusual. I like this. I like the story about the general who had 100 men and it slowly whittled down to him having none. Not because he was losing battles necessarily, but because he was stopping the violence. He wasn't promoted. At first there were 100 soldiers at his command, and then it was reduced to 70, and then to 50. And then he kept getting demoted. And so Xie Lian, they talk about the general that was demoted, right? And the kid goes, how could his career be so miserable? If he didn't make mistakes, he could at least keep his position, right? Is there such a pathetic loser in this world? And then Xie Lian's like, oh, well, you know, sometimes people make mistakes. Like, this whole thing with the general seems like such a comparison to Xie Lian, where he's like, it's kind of like me, where he just keeps getting demoted. He keeps getting demoted for trying to stop the war between one another. I feel like Xie Lian connects to him, because Xie Lian, the whole idea of just like getting less and less followers as he goes, that kind of seems like maybe it's relating to Xie Lian in his own backstory. And so Xie Lian can kind of connect to it. He's like, oh, well, little boy, there are all sorts of people in this world. I love Xie Lian's like, let's not judge him, you know, because it's basically judging me. And I love that Feng and Yao laugh because they see the similarities. They're like, there's a similarity with the general to Xie Lian. So his whole thing is similar to Xie Lian's. He's like, yeah, no, it's like, I can relate. And Feng and Yao are like, The lieutenant got demoted because he kept getting in the way of the battlefield. He prevented Half Moon soldiers from killing plain commoners and vice versa. And it just shows them like he got just getting kicked the snot out of. In the end, he had nothing to lose. And so but the kid changes his tune. He says he saved lives by preventing soldiers from killing the innocent. So this conversation gets brought up by Shang and kind of ties over here to Yao, where Shang says that the general, even though he was demoted, he saved innocent lives. And that's good. He's like, well, he saved all these people's lives. That's a good thing. Like, why did people look down upon him? What's wrong with that? And indeed, he didn't hurt anyone. And so, yeah, they all question. And Yao speaks up and says it's terribly wrong. So Yao says that the general, he was demoted because he didn't do his job. He didn't fulfill his duty. That was more important. One should carry on his duties. As a soldier, he should remember his responsibilities. Casualties in war are inevitable, and saying that people will die in war regardless. And I love that Shang has such an angry look on his face. Shang is like, well, he's like, his attempt to save lives only made his allies hate him. I mean, he became a joke to the enemy. So he says that because of that, his allies hated him, and the opposition thought he was a joke and didn't take him seriously. So he just made a fool of himself by not performing his duty. But then Shang, he ended up with nothing. So that's the thing. Ended up with nothing. But Shang doesn't see it that way. Shang is like, he saved lives. They even put up a memorial for him. And he's like, well, the memorial just proved that he ended up dead anyway. According to history, the Half Moon Kingdom was still conquered, so did his efforts pay off? So that's the question, was it worth it? And Shang says that people remembered him. which is such a crazy thing, right? Because I'm watching other shows where this topic kind of gets introduced at, and the kid's like, and he says, little boy, you're too naive. And so then they're like, and so Yao asks Xie Lian if he's correct, just to kind of prove the point to the little kid. But Xie Lian says, this lieutenant was trying to save lives. And he says, you're right. He is dead. He was killed by his men, right? And he says, not exactly. It said here that in the midst of battle, he tripped over his shoelaces. His shoelace got loose, he tripped and fell and slashed to death by the enemy's sword. So in the end, he died by tripping over his own shoelaces and going to the enemy's sword, which is kind of humorous, considering the context. But yeah, so I've watched other shows where this debate has come up, being like, is it worth it? So from Yao's perspective, it kind of ties to him being like him ascending to godhood. Like, you were given a duty, a responsibility, and you carried it out. And that's the more important thing. So, of course, he works for, like, someone that's he's worked for a deity that's done the same on the battlefield. He's like, people die in war regardless, so you need to continue on your duty, because if you don't, you're going to make enemies out of both sides, and you'll end up with nothing. There'll be no benefit to it. Whereas Shang is saying, well, yeah, he may have got demoted, but he tried his hardest to save these people's lives, and they remembered him for it. And it had a positive impact on the people that he saved. So it's a really interesting look at the two perspectives of battle. Like, do you do this one thing or do you do this other thing? And what are the good and bad that come of it, right? That's the question. It's kind of tied, Yao's perspective is tied to the fact that he's a god and how he was probably promoted, right? But yeah, so you could tell that San Long, you could tell, was kind of like, trying to support Xie Lian. And so these guys all laugh at his death. They're like, well, that's kind of funny. He tripped over his own shoelaces and died, right? Like, they kind of think that's a humorous death. And Xie Lian's like, what's so funny? And then San Long is like, is that hilarious? And they're like, well, not really, but the way he died was it was funny. Though the lieutenant was discredited in the military, some people were grateful for his help. So they dressed him as general and erected this memorial. So yeah. So Xie Lian's like, okay, well, regardless of what you think was the morally correct thing to do, Xie Lian says that in the end, the people considered him a savior, considered him like a god, and erected the memorial. And then San Long adds to it with his own little lie and says that the stone grave was magical and that if people prayed to it 3 times, it would grant their wishes, which is just complete BS, right? And so, of course, the guys are like, oh my gosh, and they instantly start, like, praying to it. Protect us, General. I love it. And then Xie Lian's like, I didn't, was that on the stone tablet? And he's like, no, I made it up. They made fun of him, so let's have some fun too. And he's like, oh, you are naughty. Look at you. I just love how, Xie Lian's like, oh, San Long. He's like, he doesn't even get on to him. He's just like, what a naughty person you are. I'm like, indeed. Indeed. He's quite devilish. And that's where they see the snake. The scorpion snake. And yeah, San Long just plucks it out of the air, just grabs it, doesn't even care. Like it's nothing, right? Grabs it like it's nothing. And it tries to like stab him with its scorpion tail, and he grabs the scorpion tail too. So he was completely in control, like was totally fine. He was like, oh, how interesting. It's like, look at this, Xie Lian. And then they figure out exactly what it is. So we find out that the priest, I'll get back to the priest over here, that they could control the snakes, control the scorpion snakes. Okay, so the priest or priestess can control the scorpion snakes. And I love that how it's given to us, how it's illustrated is through San Long using it as a jump rope. That's really cute. And Xie Lian's like, control? then there must be more of them. And of course there are. And so they have the whole skirmish to get out of the cave. And then by the time they get out, they notice that poor Zhang has the snake bite and is supposed to die in 4 hours. But they luckily, even though the venom is potent, I love that Zhao comes over and instantly wraps up his hand to like keep it from spreading, or trying to. And poor Shang is like, is he gonna die? And they're like, well, in 4 hours he will, unless we do something. But they managed, luckily Feng has like, not an antidote, but something that will slow down the process to where he can stay alive another 20 hours, right? And that's when San Long knows about this herb, the Shan Yu fern, that's in the Half Moon Pass. Funny that. And apparently it has an antidote property that can combat the snake venom. And Zhao's like, well, because Shang gets mad at him. He's like, why didn't you mention there was an antidote? And Zhao's like, well, because it's not easy to get to. He's like, you have to go and risk your life in the Half Moon Kingdom to go find it. You can only find the herb in the Half Moon Kingdom. And so Shang's like, wow, no wonder many people risk their lives to get there. And he's like, yeah, that's true. And so like, what are we going to do? And then, of course, Xie Lian's like, well, I'll go get it. It's fine. He's like, and so then they try to use the spiritual array for communication. And it's like there's no reception. There's no signal. There's just no signal there. They're like, can you get any access? Nope. They're like, Ling Wen. I love that while Xie Lian was trying to contact Ling Wen, he was sitting here like this for 2 seconds. Like how odd would that have looked? And then he tells the other guys to check too. I'm like, you guys are not very good at hiding the fact that you may have deity powers. And so that's when the snake sneaks up behind the kid. And I really thought it was going to try to like bite the kid or bite San Long, which it seems like it's going to. And then that's when Xie Lian saves him. And he did the same move that San Long did, but he didn't guard himself from the tail. He didn't guard himself from the stinger. And he throws it down. And then, of course, San Long's like, oh my gosh, your hand. So the question is, it's like he's a deity, but I guess deities can still die even though you've ascended. And then he takes the bandage and wraps up a little bit more. And then uses one of the heat balls to like get the knife tip to where he can cut the poison out, right? He's like, hang in there, Xie Lian. Ugh. And he like cuts it like in a little X where it's bleeding. And he's like, oh, don't do it. The venom is potent. You'll be poisoned by it. Not if you're a devastation ghost. Right? No. So he just sits there and sucks the poison out. Yep. And I like that Xie Lian doesn't even stop him. He's just like, oh, I guess if you want to suck the poison out of my hand, go ahead. Oh. And Yao's like, this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't made a fuss and grabbed the snake. My goodness. And he's like, but what if you had gotten hurt? And he's like, I just couldn't have stood it. Oh my God. But yeah, him spitting out the poison. And he's like, it's all right, San Long. It doesn't hurt anymore. And him looking up with like the little with like the blood around his mouth. Looking like the cutest little kid ever. Stop. And then Xie Lian's like, I mean it. You don't have to be a vampire and suck my blood anymore. And he's like, bandage your wounds if you need to. And so then, yeah, while they're examining the wounds, this is the moment where he looks down at the snake. And his eyes glow red. And the snake just blows up. Nobody else saw it. The snake just blew up. If I looked back over and saw that there was a giant snake corpse, I'd be like, wow, what happened? That's the straw that broke the camel's back, is that, yeah, Songland blowing up snakes with his eyes. I think that's a pretty telltale sign. Again, I don't want confirmation. I'm sure we'll find out, but come on. That's like, I don't know what else. Now I know why the ghosts were afraid of him, back on the cart ride, they were like, oh shit, we don't want to get blown up. Nope. No siree, Bob. And he just like kicks the snake corpse away. What nonsense. You were stung by a venomous snake. We'd better go back. And he's like, just go back. So he's like, we better go back to, like, he almost reveals go back to the heavenly realm, but he's like, damn it, I can't say it around these people. They don't know that we're gods. And he's like, well, you're leaving? What about us? You guys are going to leave us. Don't abandon us. And Xie Lian's like, we're not going to abandon somebody. And so he's like, we have to report on it since the communication array is blocked. And he's like, our top priority is to save lives. Don't worry. We're going to go get the fern. It's fine. Xie Lian's like, our top priority. He's like, I am a deity of protection. So he's like, my goal is to save lives. So we're going to go get the fern. No worries. None whatsoever. But yeah, and I love that Shang's like, oh, okay. He's like, we'll bring it back to you in 24 hours. But we need the Zhao guy to be our guide. Mm-hmm. And so they leave Yao there to protect and stay watch. And he's like, what? And so then the four of them go on to try to go to the Half Moon Kingdom. All right. And so I do like, it's really pretty, the shot of them walking the desert. And so they ask if Xie Lian is suspicious of Zhao, and Xie Lian's like, not that I'm suspicious, but since he's here, let's keep an eye on him. Let's just make sure that everything's okay. Right? And so they end up going to the Half Moon Kingdom and showing up there. It's really pretty. But yeah, once they get there, and it's really honestly what you would expect of a kingdom that's been ransacked by war and just the ruins have been left over, right? It's a ghost town. And so they're like, wow, these buildings aren't really robust anymore. And he's like, yeah, well, that's because they suffered a mass battle. And even though there's only about 10,000 people that lived here, he's like, they, had many gallant and combative soldiers. It was hard to conquer, and we don't want to get these ghost soldiers all riled up, right? And then Zhao's like, wow, you know a lot, priest. And he's like, oh, I'm just... And then that's when they hide. Mm-hmm. Everybody's suspicious. And of course, when they go to hide, San Long and Xie Lian like go and hide together. Of course they do. And that's when the two priests show up. Mm-hmm. And they say, how did they suddenly disappear? Do you want me to hunt them out one by one? I love it. Seek help from your friends. No, I prefer your help. Don't you like that? Why would I? Okay, interesting. Should we strike the first blow, Xie Lian? And we'll wait until they leave. Yeah, because he's like, we don't need to start a fight with them. We need to just find the herb and go. If we start a fight with them, it's not going to be good. And we'll probably get these half-moon soldiers on us, and we won't get back in time to save him. Like, let's not do that. And that's when the dark priestess, the one that is in the dark cloak, like turns around and looks. Yeah, she sees. Like, she kind of looks like Ling Wen a little bit, right? She looks a little bit like Ling Wen with her eyes being blue. She looks a little bit like her. It's interesting. And then we see Xie Lian. You have bad luck, my friend. Bad luck indeed. Oh, that's so problematic. I was like, of all things, our poor boy having the bad luck. But I do think she looks a lot like Ling Wen. Interesting. With the eyes and everything. I don't know though. Is it? I don't think that's Ling Wen though. Don't think so. I don't know. But yeah, of course it ends on a cliffhanger of Xie Lian getting discovered in the barrel. Of course it does. Of course it does. And so we established that the one priestess, that she only wants the others' help. Now the question is, I don't think that woman is Ling Wen. I don't think so. But if she were Ling Wen, it would make sense, I guess, that she went to go try to stop the priestess from getting in any deeper, being like, hey, this guy might show up. He's going to cause a bunch of problems. Let's just get this over with and get out of here before he shows back up. But I don't know. I don't think I'm going to have to be able to wait. I don't think I'm going to be able to wait, y'all. I may have to watch episode 9. I may have to watch episode 9 and see what goes down. Because, I don't know. I don't know, but Of course, Xie Lian gets discovered, and of course he does. And so, what are we gonna do? It seems like a fight's about to break out. I hope it doesn't, but I'm like, they just need to get the herb and go back to the village to save the guy. I want them to save Zhang for Shang's sake. I want them to save him so this little boy will have like some positive like happiness in his life, and I don't want him to like lose his family member or whatever. But I don't know what's gonna happen, but I really want to find out. So I may have to watch ahead. So we'll see. We'll see. Maybe we'll have some strong will, and I won't watch ahead too much, and I won't watch ahead to the next episode. But I don't know, y'all. It's gonna be really hard not to watch ahead because these episodes are leaving off. I've been able to handle it, all the cliffhangers up until this point, but now the woman in black looks a lot like Ling Wen. It's kind of weird. I don't think it's Ling Wen, but she looks a lot like her. It's kind of odd, and I want to know more about these two priests or this ghost or whatever they are. I want to know more about them. I want to see what happens in this battle. At this point, San Long has to be Hua Chong, but I don't want anybody in the comments to tell me yes or no. I want to find out, so I may have to watch ahead. If I do, I'm sorry, y'all have to wait. But we'll see. We'll see, right? We'll see where it goes to. So I hope y'all enjoyed this discussion. I hope y'all enjoyed it. This episode was a lot of fun, but I'm super excited for the next episode now. So in the meantime, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Heaven Officials Blessing. Bye.